Despite the rugged terrain, historic fires, and epic earthquake that rattled buildings to their foundations, San Francisco grew into a booming metropolis thanks to the people who innovated and imagined a brighter future. This is the origin of San Francisco and the determined people who built the city. Prior to the arrival of Spanish settlers, the Bay Area was not uninhabited. The Ohlone peoples had occupied these lands for thousands of years. They were peaceful hunter-gatherers, with many smaller tribes and villages throughout the peninsula and the surrounding landscape. The Spanish founded Mission San Francisco de Asís on October 9, 1776, with the intent of Christianizing the natives and forcing them into hard labor. As the Spanish continued their colonizing efforts, they established the Presidio of San Francisco and the Pueblo of Yerba Buena. However, the settlement didn't become a town of shipping and trade until October of 1835, after Mexico won its independence from Spain. It was Captain William A. Richardson of Mexico who made Yerba Buena Cove into a busy port where merchant ships could drop anchor. Over a decade later, at the start of the Mexican-American War, Captain John B. Montgomery of the United States Navy arrived at Yerba Buena Cove aboard the USS Portsmouth. His men planted the American flag on the shores on July 9, 1846, in the place where Portsmouth Square now stands. During this time, the Ohlone people were victims of the California Genocide, a series of massacres in an attempt to rid the land of its native population. 2 years later, the war ended, and California became a territory of the United States. In 1849, gold was discovered in the foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountain range, and then began one of the largest human migrations in history. Hundreds of sailing ships ferried settlers from all over the world, funneling them into the wild California through the Golden Gate Strait and landing at Yerba Buena Cove. The tall tales of miners immediately striking riches and picking up golden nuggets the size of potatoes right off the ground had led to such anticipation that passengers sometimes didn't even wait for the ship to drop anchor before they jumped off. The desire to find gold was so strong that ship captains couldn't even prevent their crews from abandoning their vessels to head for the mines. Many of the sailing ships that arrived were more or less abandoned. They were still owned by merchant and passenger companies, but without a crew to sail them, they were left in the harbor. At one point, over 800 vessels sat neglected in Yerba Buena Cove, earning the title the Forest of Masts. There was no choice but to sell off the ships to anyone who would take them. Many of the ships were hauled ashore and repurposed into hotels, shops, and bars. Some were purposely sunk in the harbor. The water was only a few feet deep during low tide, so by partially sinking the ship, it would stand up in the soft mud, and the superstructure of the vessel could be used as a home or business. The Niantic Hotel was made of a former whaling ship, and the ship is currently buried next to the Transamerica Pyramid. As the city of San Francisco continued to grow and more ships rotted and sank into Yerba Buena Cove, there was a financial incentive for companies that owned the surrounding wharves to build their piers longer so they reached the deep waters of the bay to access freight ships. The San Francisco fires of 1849 and 1851 had each leveled large amounts of the city, and whole blocks of businesses and homes had burned to the ground. There was nowhere for the city to dump the debris, so landowners simply cleared their plots and dumped all the debris in the unusable shallow waters of Yerba Buena Cove, slowly filling it in. New city streets were paved over the dump to add more land to the downtown area as it grew. In 1875, the first version of the San Francisco Ferry Building was opened at the end of Market Street, where the landfill met the waters of the bay. This marked the new edge of the city forever, and anything constructed within this new boundary was built atop the remains of the past. San Francisco was a rough-and-tumble town right from the start. Its primary businesses were based around hostels, brothels, bars, and gambling. But still, there were good and noble people who tried to make the city a home. In 1849, French immigrant Isidore Baudin established his bakery. At the time, gold miners often carried a sourdough starter and would make a crude artisan bread with it. But Isidore took the concept of sourdough bread and combined it with his French bread-making techniques and invented sourdough French bread. Sourdough French bread is very common in grocery stores and bakeries nowadays, and even home cooks produce it all the time, but it all started with the Bodine Bakery of San Francisco, which still produces high-quality sourdough French bread to this day. 1849 was a big year for San Francisco, starting off the year with a population of about 1,000 people and then quickly expanding to nearly 25,000 after the discovery of gold nearby. By 1856, over 50,000 people called the city home. As the population of the city grew outward from Market Street, the low-lying ground along the edges of the bay became overcrowded, and so the city began sprawling up and down the varied hills of the peninsula. Society's most wealthy individuals occupied grand manors around Nob Hill and Russian Hill, while poorer neighborhoods sprang up south of Market Street. This expansion of the city into the surrounding slopes created a new issue when it came to traversing these steep inclines. Enter the San Francisco cable car. They are part of a system that was first invented here in the city and are now the last remaining cable streetcar system in the entire world. Cable cars are not to be confused with funicular railways. A true cable car operates along busy streets and is pulled by endless loops of cable that never stop moving, and the cars themselves can detach at will. That detachment is what sets these cable cars apart from funicular railways like the Great Orme Tramway in Wales, because they are permanently fixed to the cable, and the cable itself will start and stop. The San Francisco cable cars began with Andrew Smith Halliday and his father. They were both inventors, and Andrew's father had a patent for wire rope. His rope was sold to various mining companies around the Bay Area, who used his patented Halliday rope tramway to transport carts of ore great distances. Halliday's wire rope inventions had revolutionized the efficiency of mining operations around the world, but there was yet another issue that continued to tug at him. The city of San Francisco had impossibly steep hills. Halliday watched as horses struggled to pull carriages and wagons up the city streets, and bore witness to a tragic event where a coachman mercilessly beat his horse as it tried to haul a carriage up the wet cobblestone road. The horse gave out, sending the carriage of passengers and horse itself tumbling to their deaths. Andrew Halliday felt that he could use his tramway invention to build a streetcar system that could safely take passengers up and down the hills. And so, he established the Clay Street Hill Railroad and hired engineer William Eppelsheimer to help design it. The idea was to install a constantly moving cable ropeway underneath the city street and have special coaches that could grip the cable, allowing it to traverse the hills and release the cable to come to a stop. The Clay Street cable car opened on September of 1873, and 4 years later, the Sutter Street Railroad opened a competing cable car service. They managed to avoid infringing on Halliday's patented designs by altering some of the mechanisms. Again, the new cable car system proved profitable, prompting more companies to open slightly different railways of their own. San Francisco's cable car system reached its peak in 1892 when 12 different cable car lines operated under 7 separate companies. Over 53 miles of cable car tracks had crisscrossed the city, which was somewhat of an urban planning headache. However, with competition comes innovation. As the companies competed with each other, they managed to perfect the cable car technology, making safer, quieter, and smoother rides for their passengers. The current system still operating today is composed of several designs and technologies perfected just before the turn of the 20th century. It starts with a single powerhouse located on the corner of Mason and Washington Streets. Inside are the massive rotating motors that turn the 4 endless loops of cables that move the various cable cars down the streets. These wheels are called sheaves. They are designed to keep the cable taut and use friction to pull it. In the past, the sheaves would have been powered by steam engines, but they were converted to electricity long ago. The cable cars can grab the rope using these grip levers, which extend beneath the slot in the tracks and can grip the cable with a variable force, sometimes thousands of pounds per square inch. When the grip operator wants to get the car rolling, they can gradually increase the pressure on the grip until they are satisfied with the speed, and then proceed to tighten the grip so that the car cannot slip from the cable. The cable will always pull the car along at a steady speed of 9.5 miles per hour, which is a little over 15 kilometers per hour. The cable cars pick up passengers in the middle of the street intersection where the ground elevation is level. To come to a stop, the gripman must release the grasp on the cable and start applying brakes using a metal foot pedal on the floor of the car. This presses the brake shoes against the wheels to slow or stop a car, but if the gripman needs extra stopping power, he can easily apply the secondary brakes, which pushes pads against the rails. To prevent the instance of a runaway car, there is an emergency brake, only used as a last resort. The gripman can pull a lever that forces a steel wedge into the slot between the tracks. It is said that the force of this steel wedge is so great that cutting torches would be required to free it from the slot. Another interesting innovation is the depression rollers. Since the cable must always be kept beneath the tracks and pulled taut, a set of depression rollers sits at the foot of each incline and pushes down on the cable to prevent it from rising up through the slot. When the grip of the car approaches, it will slam against the push bars over each roller, sliding them out of the way, and as the grip passes, the rollers will snap back into place. When the cable cars reach the end of the line, they usually let go of the rope and roll onto a turntable. The gripman and conductor will then turn the car around and push it onto the opposite tracks. The only line that doesn't require turntables is the California Street line, where the cars have grip mechanisms on both ends of the vehicle. When the cars get to the end, they simply drop the cable and coast over a switch track. The gripman and conductor then reverse their positions, and the car can begin rolling in the opposite direction. For a few decades after their invention by Andrew Halliday, cable car lines opened up in cities across the world such as Dunedin, New Zealand, Melbourne, Australia, and Glasgow, Scotland. Today, San Francisco is the only city to continue to operate these unique cable cars. And again, what makes them unique is not only that they run on street level, but that the cable never stops moving, and the cars can release the cable to independently come to a stop. After the Mexican-American War in 1848, California was ceded to the United States, becoming a territory for a short time before achieving statehood in 1850. The Bay Area quickly became a major asset to the nation, much like how New Orleans guarded the mouth of the Mississippi and access to the American interior. The Golden Gate Strait served as the gateway to the rich and valuable California interior. Recognizing the need to defend the bay from potential invaders, the U.S. Army took control of the San Francisco Presidio and annexed the tip of the peninsula at the Golden Gate, where they began constructing a fortress similar to those found along the East Coast. This fort featured masonry walls 7 feet thick and was armed with the most advanced artillery of the time. It began operations in the year 1861, and it was named Fort Point. It guarded the bay during the American Civil War and both World Wars. No enemy ever dared to pass the Golden Gate. Even if the cannons on the upper levels missed their targets, those on the lower level were positioned to skip cannonballs across the water's surface, capable of tearing holes into the hulls of any approaching ships. Fort Point was a force not to be reckoned with. Today, it operates as a museum under the shadow of the looming Golden Gate Bridge and offers fantastic views of the surrounding landscapes. Without Fort Point, there's a possibility that San Francisco may have been attacked or even invaded several times during its first century under the American flag. In 1865, the population of San Francisco was surpassing 100,000, and city officials had put serious thought into constructing a massive city park to promote the health and well-being of the citizens, and use its prestige to give the city an air of maturity and stability. A year before, a substantial amount of land on the west side of the peninsula had been reserved. It was nothing but coastal sand dunes and dry, windswept brush patches. East Coast landscape architect Frederick Olmsted, the man who designed the very successful Central Park in New York, was asked to visit San Francisco and collaborate with the city on ideas for the park's development. But Olmsted insisted that nothing would grow on the sandy coastal soil, but he did recommend creating a greenbelt across Van Ness Avenue. City officials did not like this idea. They wanted something that felt like Central Park. They brought in a 24-year-old engineer, William Hammond Hall, to survey the land, draft ideas, and begin construction. He, in turn, appointed a park commission team of 3 people, and together they began the arduous task of designing the new landscape. Park boundaries were officially set on April 4, 1870, and in the fall of that same year, construction began on the area of the park closest to the city center, which would be the strip of land referred to as the Panhandle. The process of reclaiming the land and making it suitable for growing plants was a genius one. William Hammond Hall had previously been a surveyor for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and had seen the process of coastal dune reclamation. Consultants for the project had recommended leveling the land, but Hall felt that keeping the shape of the land was instrumental in maintaining a natural-looking landscape. First, to stabilize the shifting sand dunes, a massive fence was constructed along the beach, which prevented the coastal winds from battering the sands. Next, barley and coastal bent grass were planted over the landscape and allowed to grow and die. Their roots would stabilize the sand dunes. Then over the sand went layers of topsoil, manure, and organic matter, which created the medium for trees and plants to grow. The park was constructed in phases, starting from east to west, and the initial phases lasted several years, with more advanced gardening and landscaping continuing into the 1890s. So even though the park officially opened the same day that the boundaries were set on April 4, 1870, the city park really didn't start becoming popular until 3 years later, presumably when the landscape of the Panhandle and the eastern edge began to mature. The first foliage to be planted could be credited not only to William Hammond Hall, but also to his superintendent, John Hayes McLaren. Together, they saw the planting of trees such as the coastal redwood, Monterey cypress, eucalyptus, coastal live oak, Monterey pine, big leaf maple, and cherry trees. They had planted shrubberies such as rhododendrons, azaleas, California lilacs, and manzanitas. When the park would need roads running through it to interconnect the various gardens and attractions, it was Hall who insisted on weaving the roads in between the sand dunes instead of leveling the ground to make straight thoroughfares. He felt that the landscape would help shield the pedestrians and carriages from the coastal winds, and in fact, he was right. In the end, Golden Gate Park sits on a parcel of land measuring a whopping 1,017 acres, which is 411.5 hectares, making it about 20% larger than Central Park in New York City. Like many large parks of the Victorian era, the idea was to recreate a tamed version of nature. Plants and trees are allowed to overgrow to a certain extent that they don't get out of control, but are not so manicured as to appear unnatural. It's all about balance and nurturing a sense of calm and peace. When the park first opened, it wasn't very close to the city center or even the suburbs, so it relied heavily on cable cars to transport people to and from. But once the park had grown in popularity, suburbs sprang up around it. It was no accident. It can be said that the park was built to encourage the sale of land plots on the western side of the peninsula, now known as the Sunset District. At 5:12 a.m. on April 18, 1906, the ground beneath San Francisco violently convulsed as a magnitude 7.8 earthquake ripped along the San Andreas Fault for nearly 300 miles. In less than a minute, brick buildings crumbled, streets split apart, and chimneys crashed through the rooftops. The shaking was catastrophic, but it was only the beginning. Ruptured gas lines ignited fires that raged for 3 days, while shattered water mains left firefighters helpless. Entire neighborhoods burned down as soldiers from the United States Army attempted to halt the inferno with dynamite. By the end, more than 28,000 buildings were destroyed, roughly 3,000 people were dead, and over half of the city was homeless. leaving San Francisco a smoldering ruin almost overnight. Camps were set up in the various fields and meadows of Golden Gate Park, where 200,000 citizens lived in crude shelters until the city could be rebuilt. It was much more than just a park. It was a safe haven. Good Samaritans stepped in to care for their community. Sarah Winchester, the reclusive widow who was most famous for building a sprawling and labyrinthine mansion in nearby San Jose, had donated untold sums of money to feed the displaced people of San Francisco and to buy more tents and supplies for them. Sarah herself was a victim of the earthquake. During the shaking, she was trapped in her home as it came toppling down around her. Victims of the earthquake and fires were desperate for money to support their families and rebuild their lives, but the fires had destroyed any collateral that could possibly be used to take out a loan. Banks saw them as a risk and would have denied them immediately. Amadeo Giannini, the founder of the institution that became Bank of America, lived and worked in the North Beach area of San Francisco, a district today known as Little Italy. Despite his bank burning down, he was able to save the cash from his vault, and by setting up a plank of wood on top of 2 barrels to create a makeshift desk, he loaned people the cash they needed based on no collateral other than a smile and a handshake. The cable car lines that crisscrossed the city transporting people reliably since their invention by Andrew Halliday had almost all been crumpled and destroyed. The powerhouses that pulled the wire ropes had collapsed on top of the cars. The earthquake and the fires had without question spelled doom for the once prosperous cable car industry. Today, there remains only one powerhouse running 3 cable car lines in the city, a final remnant of one man's dream, replaced worldwide by the electric tram. With large swaths of old districts and neighborhoods wiped out, there was a lot of land now available for redevelopment, which caused the city to boom into a metropolis. Golden Gate Park has helped grow the city since development tends to thrive around metropolitan parks, and the rise of motor cars flooded the streets with the putting of the internal combustion engine. It didn't take too long before San Francisco had to consider more efficient ways to move people in and out of the peninsula. The bay was abuzz with dozens of ferry lines and hundreds of boats transporting people around the region. Meanwhile, ribbons of highways rolled out across California and the nation, and all those motor cars needed an uninterrupted right-of-way. People in Marin County, who ferried into San Francisco via the Golden Gate Strait, were growing increasingly frustrated with the long queues just to board a boat. Crossing the Golden Gate was big business. Annually, there were 123,000 ferry trips across the waters of the strait. Joseph Strauss was chosen as the engineer of the bridge project in 1921, and for over a decade, he had to fight to get the project approved by various social and governmental forces that opposed the bridge. The ferry companies also fought the bridge project, fearing that their businesses would suffer. However, in May of 1923, California passed the Golden Gate and Highway District Act, which allowed for the construction to begin on the bridge. Original plans in the 1930s called for Fort Point to be destroyed since the land it sits on offers the shortest distance across the 6,700-foot wide strait. Not only that, but the fort is sitting exactly where the cables of the south end should be encased in a massive solid concrete anchor identical to the one on the north side. However, Joseph Strauss couldn't bear to destroy Fort Point. He redesigned the bridge so that the concrete anchors would be located behind the abutment, and the abutment itself would be a steel arch span over the fort. Strauss said, "While the old fort has no military value now, it remains nevertheless a fine example of the mason's art. It should be preserved and restored as a national monument." And indeed, the fort would be preserved, but not before serving the nation once more during World War II. The design of the Golden Gate Bridge was considered by many to be impossible to build. For one thing, the center span of the bridge would be the largest in the world, and to make the best effort at shortening the center span, the south support tower would need to be built right into the water of the bay, sitting on submerged bedrock. The U.S. Navy was concerned that the swirling and rapid currents of the strait would cause ships to run right into the south pillar. Then there were the high winds, salty air, fog, and earthquakes, all things that could shake and corrode the bridge. Joseph Strauss wasn't alone in the design process. He preferred to be the only one credited with the bridge's creation, but it was also the work of his team of engineers. It was Leon S. Moisseiff who designed the full suspension system that the bridge would ultimately have. It is capable of moving laterally in either direction to absorb wind forces, and consequently, this would later prove to be important for withstanding earthquakes. Charles Ellis worked out the complex mathematical equations that made the engineering of the bridge possible. Irving F. Morrow is responsible for the Art Deco design of the bridge, as well as choosing the famous color which he dubbed International Orange, a color that is both appealing and hides the inevitable rust stains that might accumulate. It was also a color that satisfied the U.S. War Department's demands for high visibility to help ships and airplanes avoid colliding with the bridge during inclement weather. Construction began in January of 1933. To build the support towers, divers had to sink 90 feet under the surface of the shark-infested waters, anchored against the dangerously fast currents by ropes. They blasted a flat surface out of the uneven rock so that a steel frame structure could be erected. The framework was for the massive reinforced concrete fenders that would protect the towers from collisions with ships. Concrete was pumped between the structure to form the fenders, and then the seawater was pumped out so workers could drive steel piles into the bedrock and begin constructing the reinforced concrete foundations of the towers. A temporary wooden trestle bridge was constructed to get men and supplies to the foundations of the south support, but a freight ship collided with it. 2 months after they repaired the trestle, strong water currents knocked down half of it. Once the support towers took shape, it was time to begin stringing the cables. 2 main cables support the weight of the bridge. Each cable is over 36 inches in diameter. It contains 61 bundles of wire, totaling 27,572 strands of wire per main cable. The main cables are a length of 7,650 feet long, and if all the strands of wire from both of them were to be laid out in one continuous wire, it would be almost 80,000 miles long and circle the globe nearly 3.5 times. To place the wires, temporary cables and footbridges were pulled across the span by boat and hoisted up to the towers. A machine would be pulled across these cables to string the galvanized steel wires of the main cables across. The galvanizing process made the wires resistant to rust. Every 452 passes, the wires were then wrapped into bundles. Once they had 61 bundles, another machine came along to squeeze them all together and bind them with a spiraling wire that formed the outer sheath of the cable. That protective outer wire was coated in a lead paste to protect the cables, and then the cables were painted the final International Orange color. The cables were anchored into massive concrete blocks 12 stories high, and with enough volume that they could be fortresses in and of themselves. The 61 bundles splay out and are wrapped around adjustable pulleys to maintain proper tension. Once the main cables were completed, the bridge spans could be completed piece by piece, evenly spanning out from both towers to maintain balance until the decks met in the middle of the main span. From there, a reinforced concrete roadbed was placed. The Golden Gate Bridge opened on May 27th of 1937 to huge crowds and fanfare. The opening celebrations lasted a whole week, but vehicles were not permitted to cross until the final day of foot traffic, which saw over 200,000 pedestrians cross the bridge in a single day. And on the next day, over in Washington, D.C., President Franklin Delano Roosevelt pushed a button that signaled the official start of vehicle traffic over the bridge at noon. Joseph Strauss and his engineers had done the impossible. They spanned the Golden Gate Strait with the world's largest suspension bridge, and it was an Art Deco marvel that would awe and inspire millions of people around the globe, spanning the decades. It not only connected 2 regions of California, but it also helped the city of San Francisco prosper and grow into the sprawling metropolis it is today. The structural integrity of the Golden Gate Bridge would prove its masterful design in 1987, when nearly 300,000 people stood on the bridge at the same time in celebration of its 50th anniversary. The weight of the pedestrians was so much that it caused the center span of the bridge to flatten out. It was alarming to look at, but remarkably, the bridge was not in any danger of damage or collapse due to the redundancy of safety designs that Joseph Strauss and his team engineered in the 1930s. Since 1937, the city of San Francisco has seen many changes and events that helped shape it into the place we know today. Too many key events and influential people to list in one presentation. However, it can all be traced back to the claiming of Yerba Buena by the proud Captain Montgomery of the United States Navy, or the invention of the cable car by Andrew Halliday when he wanted to provide a safe way for his community to climb the streets, or the protection of the city provided by Fort Point. Even the rapid expansion of the city, which could be directly attributed to Golden Gate Park and the construction of the Golden Gate Bridge. It remains a city beloved by its citizens, marked by the engineering achievements of its designers, and decorated by the quirky artists and personalities that it spawns. A city with a multifaceted story of origin. I'm Alex the Historian. Like and subscribe for more history.